Into a very nice ceremony, launching a very, very important document, the important document for the Baltic states. And the example of this document actually could be quite far beyond the Baltic states. Let me say a few comments. The state-owned enterprises are an important part of the economy in the Baltics. How they are managed and governed impact the economy and set the tone at the top, not only for the SOEs, but also for the private sector as well. In June 2010, the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance published a Baltic guidance on the governance of government-owned enterprises. This was intended as a roadmap for the governments to bridge the gap between the current practices and OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. In May 2012, we have published Governance of State-Owned Enterprises in the Baltics, intending as a rating of reform progress in both companies, legal framework, and public opinion. And our relationship with the FRC, and in particular Chris Hodge, whom you already been listening today morning, dates back to March 2010, where we hosted a regional conference in the Parliament of Lithuania, and Chris was one of the keynote speakers there. In 2011, when the FRC published their guidance on board effectiveness, we have asked Chris to come and present it in Lithuania. But instead, Chris has suggested a lot more valuable proposal. They have suggested to approach another guy, Seamus Gillen, who with the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administration has actually developed the guidance for FRC. Seamus has indeed presented this guidance actually in the UK Embassy in Vilnius, and that was only 2 weeks after the Ambassador Hunt himself has arrived to Lithuania. And Seamus well presented this guidance in Estonia a few months later. When we saw a gap in board effectiveness in our SOEs, we naturally looked to the FRC and ECCA for support again. So this new handbook has been developed to improve the work in the boards of SOEs in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and help the parties involved create international best practice in boards. This handbook is an adaptation of the Financial Reporting Council Guidance of Board Effectiveness, originally published in March 2011. The appendix section mainly draws from the presenting document from FRC, good practice suggestions from the Higgs report. So we want to thank very much the FRC for their generous support in allowing BICG, the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance, to adopt their documents of this purpose. And we also want to thank ECCA, who originally developed these documents for the FRC, for their support for our institute. And we're also involved in the OECD in this project and send a special thanks to Hans Christiansen for this support. So now I would like to ask the British Ambassador in Lithuania, Mr. David Hunt, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Antanas. Can everyone hear me? Good. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thank you. That's better. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm delighted to be here today for the launch of this guidance on board effectiveness for state-owned enterprises. I would like to thank the Baltic Institute of Corporate Governance for this kind invitation. We've worked very closely together over the last couple of years, and from my perspective, it's always time well spent to work alongside the Institute. I'm delighted that Chris Hodge and Julie Bamford from the United Kingdom are here. And as the British Ambassador, I think it's really important that we do whatever we can to share UK experience and UK expertise wherever possible. But this, more importantly, is part of a two-way exchange between Lithuania and the United Kingdom. We cooperate intensively on a bilateral basis, particularly during this presidency of the European Union. So this is just one more component in our already strong bilateral cooperation. So I shall be very brief. I should just wish you every success for your discussions today. I hope that this is a living document, something that serves a purpose over the longer term, and I hope this is the first of many more opportunities where we can work more closely together. Ačiū. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And actually, we have a few framed guidance of the board effectiveness. I would like to invite to the stage Christian to present for the godfathers of that guidance.
Thank you very much, Antanas. But before we go to this, I would actually ask maybe, Chris, you would like to just make a brief remark?
I must admit to being here under slightly false pretenses, because although the original version of this new guidance was issued by the FRC, as Antanas has already explained, we didn't do any of the work on it. It was done by Julie and her colleagues at the ICSA, and all the work on the new version has been done by Christian and his colleagues here. So I don't have a lot to say about the content other than it's very good and you really ought to read it. But thought as I have a brief platform, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of points that were made in discussion here yesterday. The first one was something that Torben Ballegard emphasised in his opening remarks, where he said that the boards must be the guardians of common sense, and that we needed to avoid putting boards in a position where they have to choose between rules and common sense. And I think that's entirely right. And if a code or a guidance works well, it's because it's distilling common sense and good practice and reflecting that rather than attempting to impose something different. My own view, obviously we're slightly biased, is that this guidance does that incredibly well. I hope you'll agree when you read it that a lot of this is just a case of good common sense being brought together in one place. That said, the other thing that needs to be remarked on here is that even if we have managed to get the right level of principle and common sense in this guidance, Christian and his colleagues have still needed to adapt it to make it fit the particular circumstances of state-owned enterprises, but also to make it suitable for use in the Baltic states. And I think that illustrates the point that's been made a number of times over the last couple of days, that even at the level of principle, there needs to be a degree of flexibility in different countries in the way that things are applied, because there will be, as Ugo Bassi said, legal, cultural and many other aspects that are unique to that country that need to be reflected in what you finally issue. And I think I'm not the only one. I'm sure many of us were very reassured to hear what Mr. Bassi and Jeroen earlier said about the commitment not to impose a system developed in one country onto another one at European level. As I say, I thought that was a very welcome confirmation of their approach, and this is a good example of where things are usable in one country but need to be adapted in the other. And other than that, I would encourage you to read it.
And Julie, of course, I would be happy if Seamus Gillen would have been here with you, but I also would like Julie to make a small remark.
First of all, thank you, Chris, for your kind remarks and acknowledging the work we did on this. I worked with Seamus Gillen on developing this guidance for the UK, and I'm delighted that it's now finding its way into other member states and other people are finding it useful. To give you a little bit of the history, the reason FRC asked ICSA to help produce this guidance was because we'd originally produced a document on boardroom behaviours, which was groundbreaking in its approach. And also because as company secretaries, we have a unique position in boardrooms, and we see how boardrooms actually operate, and what works and what doesn't work. But we didn't just sit down and decide, okay, what do we think is a good thing? What we did was we went out and asked people. We asked everyone what they thought worked in boardrooms and where boardrooms might have problems, what was going wrong. It was a response to the problems of the financial crisis, and focus had moved on to behaviours at that time, and we had a two-stage process. We initially just went out and asked for everybody's thoughts. And then when we went out a second time, we put together a document that summarised all the important themes we'd got from the first consultation. And when we went out and asked for detailed comments on those themes that were starting to emerge. And we also had confidential meetings with company secretaries and chairmen of boards in UK PLC. And those confidential meetings really started through those meetings we developed these themes that were emerging, because in that environment, chairmen were prepared to say things they wouldn't put in writing. They wouldn't say in another environment because it was completely confidential. And from that, we put together this guidance. So it isn't us talking, it is the thoughts and views of the people who actually live and breathe the work of boardrooms on a daily basis, and I think that's the value of it. Now, I personally did the analysis on all the written responses we'd had and notes from all the meetings. And when we got these themes coming through, we then had a steering group of people who then took those and then wrote the document. And those meetings, and Chris was on that steering group, we had company secretaries, we had professors from universities, both on behaviours and on sort of corporate law and all those issues. So we had a wide group of people who all put their input. Institute of Business Ethics were also part of that steering group, and that's how this document came about. So I think the value of it is that it reaches areas that rules don't reach. It's about behaviours, it's about dynamics around the board table, it's about what's effective and what works. I was struck yesterday, for those of you who were here yesterday, the discussion by Torben Bamford Sorensen, who highlighted that directors are human beings. And he also highlighted the need to move to an interactive board, doing things in the right way rather than doing the right things. And that really struck a chord with me, is what came out of our guidance, because no director ever chooses to make a bad decision. Everybody wants to make the right decisions. Directors are trying to do the right things. But sometimes the board processes and the dynamics around the board can get in the way of that. And if I would highlight a couple of things in this document when you go away, that I think out of the consultation, two of the things that came through very strongly was the section 2 on decision making. It talks about what facilitates good decision making. Then it also talks about factors that can limit effective decision making. And those are useful for everybody in a decision making situation, and for boards that's really important. And the more important thing, and the one theme that came through most strongly when we did our consultation, was that it's highlighted on page 3 and paragraph 1.3, and it starts by saying an effective board should not necessarily be a comfortable place, and challenge as well as teamwork is essential. Now, we're not saying boards should be dysfunctional and forever arguing, but everybody's voice has to be heard around the board table. Everybody's views have to be heard, and everybody has to stand up and challenge. And if they are uncomfortable with decisions being made or proposals, they have to say so, and those have to be debated. If you have dominant personalities on a board that don't allow free discussion, you've got a dysfunctional board. So the whole document is useful. It is all good stuff. As I say, it covers the areas that rules cannot cover. And I'm really delighted that this guidance is now being adapted and adopted in other member European states. And thank you for your time.
So with that, I just want to conclude by saying really thank you to ICSA and to IFC. I think you put some internal credit and bonus points into allowing us to adapt it, and it's very much appreciated. If you sit in the back and you didn't get a hard copy, there are still some on the chairs in the front. Thank you very much.
Ambassador.